Welcome to the Long View from Saskatchewan. My name is Alan Friesen. Well, there was a whole generation of Saskatchewan people who grew up with the CTV television show Corner Gas, set in the fictitious town of Dog River, Saskatchewan. Every year, Saskies would tune in and watch these made-up characters in this made-up town of Dog River deal with their made-up problems that they came upon. And as a province, we were big fans because this was probably the best show that ever came out of Saskatchewan. My family and I were great fans of the show as well. One time when we drove down to the Regina area, we took time to drop in the town of Rollo, south of Regina, to check out the set of this imaginary Dog River. And I think even more exciting for me was the time that my daughter and I got to see the airing of the Corner Gas movie in a theater in Saskatoon. I think it was the first or second day that it came out, and I've never seen people walk into a theater so full of joy, and I've never seen a whole audience in a theater sing along to a theme song. It was quite spectacular. It was like we were all friends and neighbors in some way. And it makes a person wonder, why was that show so popular? Well, I think it had to do with the fact that even though these were made up characters in a made up town dealing with made up problems, it seems like we could recognize those characters in our lives in some way. And I think the most recognizable of all of those characters that were shown on Corner Gas was Oscar Leroy. Now, if some of you haven't had an opportunity to watch that series, Corner Gas, Oscar Leroy was the old guy in town who was known for his ability to always be grumbling, always to be insulting, and generally to be able to be in a bad mood no matter what the circumstance. Now, to be fair, Oscar shared this Saskatchewan trait of being extreme in his egalitarianism. Now, I talk about that trait in one of my other videos called "Yes, Saskatchewan Does Have a Unique Culture." So check it out if you haven't watched it yet. But this idea that he was extreme in his egalitarianism meant that he treated everyone equally. It didn't matter if it was his son or the town police officer or the town mayor or some visiting dignitary or even the youth from the local church youth group. He treated them all the same way. Now, unfortunately for Dog River, being who he was, he always treated them in a miserable manner. It didn't matter who they were. He was willing to insult everyone, and he was willing to call everyone a donkey, or I guess that other word that is sometimes used to describe a donkey, which I won't mention here. Now, I bring this up now. Why was he recognizable? Well, I think he was so recognizable for us because seems like every town and village has had its own Oscar Leroy in our lives. It's, the kind of person who is always content to not be content. Now, to be fair, as we become more urbanized here in Saskatchewan, it becomes easier and easier to avoid those Oscar Leroys in our lives. But for those of us who still live in rural areas, this Leroy, who we might meet when we're going to pick up the mail one day, is going to be there next week as well. And we're going to meet him in a month's time, and in a year's time, in 10 years' time. And to be honest, we could be dealing with Oscar for our whole lives. Now, it seems a little bit extreme. It seems like a tough road to hoe, but it's been one of those things that have allowed Saskatchewan to survive and thrive through the decades, even though we've had so many topics, so many challenges in which we disagree as a people. We've disagreed on so many things historically, and yet we've still managed to be able to get along. Now, I'll give you an example. I remember when I was younger, growing up in the early 70s, and Our local village and surrounding area was quite political, as I remember it, even as a child. Like, you were either a CCF supporter, which had just become the NDP, or you were a supporter of the Liberal Party. It was one of the two, and everyone had a side. And it was as if the community was cut right down the middle. You one or the other, and even local churches were divided between the two sides, and even households, families were sometimes divided. I remember one older gentleman saying that come election time, there was no point in him going to vote because his wife would come along and her vote would cancel his. And come election time, everyone knew what everyone would vote, and there was really no point in counting the votes at the end of the evening because everyone knew what the numbers would be. Well, you can imagine in a community like that, there would be so many disagreements and so many heated arguments. And indeed there was, yet looking back, I find it amazing that people would be able to disagree and argue, and yet they would still be there for each other in times of crisis. They would still be able to get along in spite of their disagreements. I guess we could call that the Oscar Leroy factor, if we want to call it that. I have this feeling that we in Saskatchewan are losing that ability to get along in spite of our disagreements. And I don't know what the reason is. Is it because we're becoming more urbanized, that it's becoming easier to avoid the Oscar Leroys in our lives? Is it because of social media? Is it because of mainstream media? Uh, is it because our local institutions are having less influence over time? Maybe it's a combination of those factors, but it's certainly something that I believe is more and more noticeable. Leave a comment in the comment section if you think this is true. But have you noticed how sometimes now, or very often now, uh, there aren't really debates on issues. Rather, one side just ends up into name calling the other side. So the one side calls the other side communists. They're just a bunch of communists. And the other side calls this side a bunch of racists, or what else do they, fascists, or whatever the thing is. Those are just silly comments. And they show that people are not willing to engage in dialogue. They're not willing to engage in debate anymore. It's just become easier just to see the other side as someone whom you can insult, personally, instead of going after the arguments that are being proposed. Saskatchewan is going to need to be making a lot of important changes in the future, in the coming years, if we want to become one of the freest and prosperous places on earth. And in order to do that, we will need to make a lot of changes. And to make those changes, we are going to have a lot of debates and discussions. And that's a good thing. That's a really good thing to be able to do that. And the most important thing is, as we do that, that we learn or remember how to get along with each other in spite of these differences in opinions. That, if we're able to do that, if we're able to reach back into the past and remember these lessons that we had from before, we've got an incredible future in front of us, incredible future in store for us. So do we need more Oscar Leroys in our lives? No, I don't think we do. It's kind of maybe nice if we don't have too many. But on the other hand, it is important that we remember those lessons we learned from meeting Oscar on Main Street every week when we went to pick up the mail. So if you've got a comment about what I have had to say, please leave it in the comment section. Tell me if you agree with me that our society's been changing or not. Subscribe to the channel if you haven't as of yet, and we'll talk again next week. But until then, stay Saskatchewan and stay free.